D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton has a Democratic challenger for the first time in 16 years. Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner Andy Miscuk has announced he'll run against the longtime delegate in the September primary. The Adams-Morgan representative says Congresswoman Norton has not done enough for D.C. voting rights. So what are his plans if he becomes the district's representative? Welcome, Andy. Talk a little bit more about this. First of all, you announced that you were going to be running against Ms. Norton about 2 weeks ago.
Correct.
And I remember that one of your primary issues was the fact that you felt that Ms. Norton hadn't done enough for voting rights. Talk about that, first of all, and then we'll get to kind of what she's done since then in terms of signing on the Davis bill. But
the flurry of activity.
Yeah, a lot has gone on in the last 2 weeks. But first of all, talk a little bit about why you decided to run, because that's pretty important.
I think you know, every politician needs a challenge. They need a challenger. They need to be kept up on the issues. I personally felt we need to do more for voting rights, and not just in the legislative side. I think in an education side. I think a lot of people in the District of Columbia need to know what their voting rights are and really aren't. They need to know what the issues are, the fact that we don't have voting representation in the District of Columbia. 550,000 Americans aren't represented in Congress. And it's not only an issue just in the District of Columbia. The rest of the nation needs to know that. Plenty of people in this country don't know that the District of Columbia is not represented at all in Congress other than our delegate seat and a shadow representation, shadow delegation. I think the Davis bill is a great opportunity here. I think it's a foot in the door. It's not perfect. It's far from what the District of Columbia deserves.
Let's talk, before we continue, let's tell people what the Davis bill is all about.
The Davis bill, also known as the D.C. Fair Act, it's an official title, basically would give the District of Columbia one representative in the House of Representatives, and a trade-off would put a representative in Utah. Utah was next in line for a representative during the last redistricting.
Because their population has increased, correct?
Correct, correct. And it's considered a politically neutral solution because it would most likely be a Republican elected in the Utah seat. So it seems as a partial solution for the problem that we have in the District of Columbia. It's been sitting on the table for 3 years. It's been rather dormant until the past few weeks.
Now, a lot of people would say, almost a no-brainer, D.C. doesn't have voting rights, why not give it to them? But to explain the political background behind it, like you said, a lot of people feel that if D.C. were to get representation both in the Senate and the House, that would mean more, I guess the Republicans would be opposed to that since they would feel that the Democrats would win an extra seat. Is that pretty much?
I think a lot of people feel that way. I think that it's tilting the political balance.
Right.
I think we've had 200 years of a system somewhat, in a sense, perfecting itself politically.
Right.
And now anytime you make any kind of adjustment to that, you're going to throw the balance off. And I think a lot of people are scared of that. And I think there's a lot of people like Tom Davis, though, who look at it the other way. This is the right thing to do. We're not talking politics here. We're talking the right thing to do. We've got hundreds of thousands of troops across the world fighting for democracy, but yet in our own nation's capital, we have 550,000 people who have no representation in Congress. It's appalling.
And you were one, I believe you served in the military as well.
I did.
So at one point you were one of them? Were you
no, I never served overseas.
Okay.
But I served as enlisted and as an officer, enlisted in Special Forces and as an officer in military intelligence in the United States Army.
You're saying that Ms. Norton didn't do enough or hasn't done enough. She hasn't had an opponent in 16 years. Talk about that. I mean, she signed off now on this Davis bill. She's appeared on saying she supports this, and it's now passed the House Reform Committee. What are your thoughts on that? Why do you feel that she's suddenly been able to say, okay, look, I'm going to be backing this bill, which she wasn't wholeheartedly on the table with before?
I can't tell you what the delegate's thinking. I think that's her responsibility to go out and tell everybody what she's thinking, including the neighborhoods, the city council, so on and so forth. It was kind of a surprise to a lot of us that all of a sudden now this bill is being talked about. You would have thought there would have been some warm-up to it, saying, hey, we're starting to talk about this bill before, we're starting to move on this bill before. All of a sudden there's this big announcement, we've made a compromise. When you looked at the textual changes in the bill, there's not that many of them. And I don't think it warrants 3 years of it sitting on the table for these, which I believe are minor changes to the document. And I think these could have been pushed a long time ago. It's overdue.
So you're saying she could have done more? And you
I think
feel
so,
that,
absolutely.
So what do you feel you can bring to the table that she hasn't brought already?
I think I can bring some energy to this and going out into the neighborhoods. Our delegate has shown that she has no interest in going out to the neighborhoods. And our neighborhoods in our city are vital. We've got a lot of diverse people with a lot of ideas and a lot of heart that can bring a lot of energy to this issue. And I think we need to go out to the individual neighborhoods and talk to the people about this issue and say, this is what's on the table. This is what we need you to fight for. This is what we need you to be involved in. We need somebody to carry the banner and say, these are the voting rights organizations out there, such as DC Vote, a premier organization in our city. You know, I did a little check on what kind of revenue they bring in, and it's about $1 per resident in the District of Columbia. And that's what's being invested in a premier organization in our city, and we really need to bump that up. People need to know that organization exists. People need to know that the DC Fair Act exists. Even with the flurry of activity in the past 2 weeks, I continually, every day, tell multiple people what the DC Fair Act is. Even with all the news coverage, I think it's been very generous from the news agencies covering this issue, because it's an important issue. We still need people educated on the issue, and we need somebody to go in the neighborhoods and do that.
Because a lot of people may not understand that they don't have, in terms of representation in Congress, they don't have that.
I think they understand they don't have representation. They don't understand the chances that are out there to turn this around, and that they need to be motivated and they need to be brought on board with this issue.
All right. Well, we'll have much more with Andy Miscuk. We, of course, are also taking your calls at 703-387-1020, but we pause here to update news headlines and the forecast, and we'll continue our conversation with DC Delegate hopeful Andy Miscuk.